what if I am babysitting or house sitting and I need to defend myself against an intruder or worse, even the homeowner? Can you comment on that?
See, that's where it gets murky. But if I am in this house lawfully, as a babysitter, I am in the house lawfully, and I believe that the house is being invaded, I have the same right as the owner of that house to defend myself or to defend the property. I have the same right. Right. There are dangers in this, though, obviously so, but I have the same right.
Again, you can't just shoot because there's a knock at the door and shoot right through the door because you're scared. It's got to be reasonable.
And here again we get to that big old word reasonable and reasonableness, and what does it mean? And it's defined based on circumstance and situation, invariably how it's defined.
And so even in that question just asked, what if it's the homeowner coming home early from the trip?
Here again, that accident. See, then the accident happens because the babysitter or the house sitter believes the homeowner is coming home the next day or the day after, and reasonably believes that the home is being invaded. And that babysitter, that house sitter would have the right or would be justified based on the act justified in doing it as long as all of the attendant circumstances, again, point to reasonableness.
There's another question from Brandon. Do these laws apply if you are staying at a hotel or renting a home?
That's, again, good question. If I have rented this room, then this room is my castle. But there are obviously some other things that come into play if you're in a hotel because of the way hotels operate. That is, people like maids, etc., come in. And if you don't want the maid in, then you put something on your door saying, do not disturb.
I think, and let's hope the maid's going to knock first before entering.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you would assume that behavior on the part of the hotel employee is going to be based on again, what that policy of that hotel actually is. So if you're in a hotel room and you do something, that person coming through that door would have to come through that door in a fashion that would give that person inside that room a reasonable belief that their life is in danger. Not that the maid just opened the door. Right. Because that arguably would be unreasonable.
Okay. Well, you've made it clear that as long as you're in your castle, whether it's you've rented the place or you live there, you own it, or you're on vacation in a hotel room, what if you see an intruder breaking into your neighbor's property? Do you have the right to go over there and confront the intruder?
You know, there is in Louisiana law the concept that not only can you defend your home, but you can also defend your property. You can also defend your automobile. You can also defend it. Whether that extends to a neighbor's,
somebody else's property,
somebody else's property,
someone else.
My knee-jerk answer to that is no. However, again, it may, based on, again, attendant circumstances, based on how reasonable that act actually is when you look at all the facts surrounding it, it may in fact be reasonable.
And is that because, big picture-wise, if you have the option of retreating without taking a chance that you might be killing somebody who's innocent, you should retreat because that's the more reasonable approach?
It's absolutely, and you ought to call the authorities in. You ought to call those people in whose job it is to enforce the law. And you ought to give them that opportunity to do so. And you shouldn't we should never take law into our own hands. We ought to leave it to people who are supposed to enforce and who are...
Yeah, unless it's the last resort. In other words, if you're backed into a corner and you can't wait for the police to come, then if you're acting reasonably, then you have no worries defending yourself.
Absolutely, but of course, the new law says you don't have to be backed into a corner.
Right.
You don't have to be up against a wall. You don't have to be, the thing doesn't necessarily have to progress to a point where I'm going to get a knife in my throat unless I kill. It can be something, John, as a belief that that person who I am engaged now with in some kind of fashion that's not reasonable, but that person does something that gives me the belief that my life now might be in danger. That person goes into their pocket, and based on everything that's happened so far, it's reasonable for me to believe in their pocket is a gun. I can shoot that person.
Right, and and I bet you saw that in your own courthouse, where someone accused of committing murder says, "No, I thought that he was pulling a gun out of his pocket. Turned out to be a stick of gum, or a cell phone, but I thought he was going for a weapon, and I felt like I didn't have a choice."
We've seen it in terms of police encounters with individuals on the street. We've seen that kind of piece play out. We've seen it in terms of your private citizen. Again, we've seen that piece play out. And invariably, though, it has been a determination by jury or either grand jury or petit jury as regards whether that was a reasonable belief.
Right. And the DA goes to the grand jury or the petit jury to ask the grand jurors, this isn't the actual trial, but in order to make a determination whether to prosecute.
Or not. Absolutely, whether you prosecute or not. Okay. And in so many instances, the decision is not. That's just a fact. The decision is not to prosecute.
Let's turn it around. Here's a question that asks it from the other direction. If I am presumed to be a threat and have done nothing, in my opinion, to provoke a fight, how can the other person try to claim that it's stand your ground defense?
They can always try to claim, but the fact, what all of those facts and circumstances that surround that event or incident will determine ultimately whether or not that was a reasonable belief on the party who did the act that I had the right to stand my ground.
And reasonable, again, it's one of those things where if you ask a bunch of halfway educated, not even educated, just bright people, they don't have to have a formal education, do you think that what this person who defended himself or herself did was okay or appropriate? And if they all say no, that was a way too big an overreaction, nobody reasonably would think they're in danger in that situation, then you might be prosecuted for murder or manslaughter. On the other hand, if just talking with a bunch of people and they say, well, no, I think that was reasonable, and that's what the grand jury might do too, to help the DA, the district attorney, decide if he wants to prosecute.
This may be a bad way of putting this, but reasonableness almost becomes like that old saying about pornography. I may not be able to tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it.
It's hard to define.
Hard to define.
But you can say, in the word reasonable, most people know what that means. That means you had good reason, or it was not unreasonable in order to proceed that way. Well, let's talk for a minute about what are some of the ought tos. I mean, suppose you're going to be, you're on your own, you live in an apartment, or whether or not you're on your own, what should you do if you believe you hear somebody breaking into the house?
The first thing you should do is call the police. I mean, the first thing you should do is call 911. That's always the first act a citizen should take, is to call the rightful authority to come and deal
hopefully you
with
get
this.
911 and they're on their way. Any other constructive thoughts?
Sure. If you still believe that there is in fact someone and they're out there and they're about to come in your house, you need to start something on your part to protect yourself. Okay. Now, what does protection mean? But you need to do something, some acts on your part to protect yourself.
As long as you're armed at this point. If you have no weapon, then maybe you just want to hide. But if you're armed and you want to stand your ground, would it be good advice to yell out and say,
Absolutely.
Identify yourself?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Say it good and loud, call it out a couple of times, and then if the person doesn't speak back to you and say, hey, it's me, it's your roommate, it's your spouse coming home early from a trip, that might be one way to avoid a terrible mistake.
I mean, it just almost, you could say, common sense says that after I call the police, or even at the same point I'm calling police, that I ought to make it clear to the person who I believe may be coming in uninvited, that I make it clear to this person, you're not invited.
Right.
You're not invited. This is who I am. I live here. You don't. You're not invited. And do not come any further. Do not come inside of my house, et cetera, et cetera. But you ought to do that before you pull a trigger.
And some people might have a different opinion. My opinion is, if you can safely exit your house and not leave behind a child or anything, any situation like that, get out. If you can get out of that, retreat from that dangerous situation, or what might be a dangerous situation, retreat. Go to your neighbor's house and get them to call the cops.
If retreat is possible, then it'll be a wise thing to do to retreat, because even where you've called out and you've gotten no response, that could be because of something else existing outside that door that you're unaware of.
Right.
That person outside that door may again be a person that for whatever the reason can't respond. So the better part of valor would be to retreat if retreat is possible.
Okay, well, it's been a fabulous discussion.